Victoria Sterling pressed her ear closer to the nursery door, her heart racing as hushed voices drifted through the mahogany panels. After 18 months of caring for 8-year-old Emma Cross in the sprawling Manhattan penthouse, she had developed an instinct for trouble. Tonight, that instinct screamed danger. The conversation inside Emma's playroom wasn't meant for her ears. Natasha Vale, the stunning blonde who had captured billionaire Damien Cross's heart 6 months ago, spoke in clipped tones that carried none of the honey-sweet charm she displayed in public. "The child is becoming a problem," Natasha's voice cut through the silence like ice. "She's too attached to that nanny. It's unhealthy." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She had dedicated herself completely to Emma's well-being, helping the little girl heal from losing her mother in a car accident. 4 years earlier, the bond they shared felt natural, protective, nurturing. How could love be considered unhealthy? "Perhaps we should reconsider the timeline," came another voice, unfamiliar and calculating. "Moving too quickly might raise suspicions." "Darling, suspicion is exactly what we want to avoid," Natasha replied smoothly. "Damien trusts me completely now. The merger negotiations have him distracted, and he's relying on my emotional support more each day. Once we're married, everything changes." Victoria's hands trembled as she recognized the other woman's name. Rebecca Chen, Natasha's closest friend and business partner in her boutique consulting firm. What were they planning that required such secrecy? The sound of footsteps approaching the door sent Victoria scrambling down the hallway, her soft shoes silent on the polished marble floors. She made it to the kitchen just as the playroom door opened, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Victoria, there you are," Natasha's melodic voice called out. "I was just showing Rebecca Emma's artwork." Such a creative child, though perhaps a bit too dependent on adult attention. Rebecca emerged behind Natasha, her dark eyes sharp and assessing as they swept over Victoria. "You must be the nanny everyone raves about. Natasha tells me you've become quite indispensable around here." The word indispensable dripped with subtle mockery, and Victoria forced a professional smile. "Emma is a wonderful child. Caring for her has been the greatest joy of my career." How sweet. Natasha's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her green eyes. "Though I do worry about children who struggle with independence, Emma seems to need constant reassurance these days." Victoria bit back her response. Emma had been thriving under her care, growing more confident and happy each month. The child's recent anxiety stemmed from the changes Natasha's presence had brought to their peaceful routine, not from any dependency issues. "Where is Emma now?" Victoria asked, glancing toward the empty playroom. "Having her bath? I suggested she start taking care of such things herself." 8 is certainly old enough for personal responsibility," Natasha replied crisply. Victoria's chest tightened. Emma still needed help with her hair, and sometimes grew frightened when alone in the large bathroom. These weren't signs of immaturity, but normal childhood needs that deserved patient attention, not forced independence. "I should check on her," Victoria said, moving toward the hallway. "Actually, I'd prefer if you didn't. Emma needs to learn that she can't always run to you for every little thing. It's time she developed some resilience." The command was delivered with such authority that Victoria hesitated. Technically, Natasha had no official role in Emma's care, but her relationship with Damien gave her increasing influence over household decisions. The delicate balance of power was shifting daily, and Victoria found herself walking on eggshells around the woman who would soon become Emma's stepmother. 20 minutes later, Victoria heard Emma's bedroom door close and waited another 10 minutes before quietly making her way upstairs. The little girl's room was dark except for the soft glow of her nightlight, and Victoria could hear muffled sounds from beneath the covers. "Emma, sweetheart?" Victoria whispered, settling carefully on the edge of the bed. A small blonde head emerged from under the quilted comforter, tears streaming down Emma's flushed cheeks. "Miss Victoria, I couldn't reach the shampoo bottle, and the water got in my eyes, and I was scared." Victoria's heart broke as Emma threw her small arms around her neck, seeking the comfort that had been denied. "Oh, darling, it's okay. We're safe now," Natasha said. "Big girls don't cry about silly things like shampoo," Emma whispered against Victoria's shoulder. She said Daddy doesn't like crybabies. Fury blazed through Victoria's chest. Damien adored his daughter and had never once suggested she was too emotional or demanding. This was Natasha's poison, carefully administered to undermine Emma's confidence and natural attachment to her father. Your daddy loves every single thing about you, including when you need help or comfort, Victoria said firmly. There's nothing wrong with being 8 years old and needing grown-ups sometimes. That's what we're here for. Emma's grip tightened. But what if Natasha's right? What if I'm not good enough for Daddy to love? The question shattered Victoria's heart into pieces. This confident, creative, loving child was being systematically convinced she was flawed, burdensome, unworthy of affection. It was emotional abuse disguised as character building, and Victoria knew she had to act. Listen to me very carefully, Victoria said, tilting Emma's chin up so their eyes met. You are perfect exactly as you are. Your daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky, just like Mommy did. Anyone who tells you different is wrong, and that's not your fault. Emma nodded solemnly, then glanced toward her bedroom door. Miss Victoria, why does Natasha want to send me to that school so far away? Ice flooded Victoria's veins. What school, sweetheart? The one she showed Daddy pictures of? It's in another state, and kids live there all the time, even on weekends. She said it would help me become more independent and make Daddy proud. Boarding school. Natasha was planning to isolate Emma completely, removing her from everyone who loved and protected her. The timeline was accelerating faster than Victoria had realized. When did she show these pictures to your daddy? Victoria asked carefully. Yesterday, after dinner. They thought I was playing in my room, but I heard them talking. Natasha said it would be good for me to learn discipline and proper behavior before she becomes my new mommy. Victoria's mind raced through the implications. Damien's marriage to Natasha was scheduled for spring, still months away. But if Emma was sent to boarding school before then, she would be completely vulnerable. Cut off from anyone who might notice changes in her emotional well-being or question Natasha's treatment of her. Emma, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I will always care about you and want you to be safe and happy, Victoria said, choosing her words carefully. If you ever feel scared or confused about anything, you can always talk to me, okay? Even if I'm far away at school. Innocent question pierced Victoria's resolve. She couldn't make promises she might not be able to keep, but she could ensure Emma knew she had value beyond what others told her, especially then. And remember, you are smart and brave and wonderful. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Yes. Victoria tucked Emma back into bed and watched her drift into sleep. Her mind churned with growing certainty that this family was in serious danger. Natasha's manipulation wasn't just cruel, it was calculated and purposeful. But what was her ultimate goal beyond marrying a wealthy man? The baby monitor on Emma's dresser crackled softly, the receiver in the kitchen still active from earlier. In the evening, Victoria had forgotten to turn it off after checking on Emma during dinner. And now she wondered what other conversations might have been accidentally recorded. Returning to the kitchen, she found the monitor still transmitting, its small red light blinking steadily. As she reached to turn it off, voices drifted through the speaker with startling clarity. Natasha and Rebecca were still in the building, their conversation now taking place in Damien's home office. The merger documents are exactly where you are, said they'd be Rebecca's voice, carried through the monitor. Harrison will pay handsomely for this level of inside information. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Harrison Mitchell was the CEO of Damien's biggest competitor, the man trying to destroy Cross Industries through aggressive buyout attempts. Natasha wasn't just manipulating Damien emotionally, she was selling his business secrets to his enemies. Sure, the transfer looks natural, Natasha replied. Damien can't suspect anything until after we're married and I have legal claim to half his assets. By then, Cross Industries will be hemorrhaging money, and he'll need my family's connections to stay afloat. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Natasha wasn't just a gold digger seeking a wealthy husband. She was part of an elaborate corporate espionage scheme designed to destroy Damien's company from the inside while positioning herself as his savior. Emma's exile to boarding school would eliminate the one person whose distress might alert Damien to what was happening under his own roof. Victoria's hands shook as she adjusted the monitor's volume, desperate to capture every word of this damning conversation. The evidence was falling into her lap, but she needed more than fragments to convince Damien his fiancée was betraying him on every possible level. "What about the nanny?" Rebecca asked. "She seems more observant than you initially thought. Victoria won't be a problem much longer." Natasha's voice turned cold with calculation. "I'm already working on Damien to dismiss her before the wedding." A few more strategic comments about Emma's unhealthy attachment. Maybe a suggestion that Victoria is undermining my authority as Emma's future stepmother, and he'll let her go to keep the peace. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in around her and Emma both. Natasha's plan was seamless, ruthless, and nearly complete. Within weeks, Victoria would be gone. Emma would be shipped off to boarding school. Damien would be alone with a woman who was systematically destroying everything he'd worked to build. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, revealing details about stock manipulations, leaked merger strategies, and planned sabotage that would cost Cross Industries millions. Victoria listened with growing horror and determination, knowing she held the key to saving both Emma and Damien. She could find the courage to use it. As the voices finally faded and footsteps moved toward the elevator, Victoria sat in the darkened kitchen, surrounded by the sleeping silence of a home that felt increasingly like a battlefield. Tomorrow, she would need to make impossible choices about loyalty and professional boundaries, and the lengths she was willing to go to protect a child she loved more than her own safety. But tonight, the question was whether anyone would believe a nanny's word against the charming, beautiful woman who had captured one of New York's most powerful men completely under her spell. The battle for Emma's future was about to begin, and Victoria Sterling was no longer just the nanny. She was the only person standing between a precious child and a predator who wore designer clothes and spoke in honeyed lies. The manila envelope arrived at Victoria's apartment 3 days later, slipped under her door while she was at the grocery store. Inside, she found copies of financial documents that made her blood run cold. Bank transfers, shell company records, and communication logs between Natasha and Harrison Mitchell painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive it took her breath away. A handwritten note accompanied the documents. "Thought you should see what your employer's fiancé has been up to. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep quiet. A friend." Victoria spread the papers across her small kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as she absorbed the magnitude of Natasha's deception. The corporate espionage was even worse than she had overheard. Natasha had been feeding Cross Industries confidential information to their competitors for months, receiving payments that totaled nearly $500,000. But the financial betrayal wasn't the worst discovery. A psychological evaluation report bore Emma's name and falsified signatures from doctors Victoria had never heard of. The document painted Emma as severely disturbed, recommending immediate residential treatment for attachment disorders and behavioral dysfunction. It was dated for next week, just days before Damien planned to announce his engagement publicly. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Torres, Damien's longtime assistant. "Need to see you urgently. Coffee shop on 5th and 47th, 1 hour, come alone." The message sent chills through Victoria's spine. Margaret had always been professionally cordial, but never sought private meetings. Something significant had changed, and Victoria suspected it. Related to the anonymous documents now spread across her table, the coffee shop buzzed with afternoon crowds when Victoria arrived, scanning the room until she spotted Margaret's familiar gray hair in a corner booth. The older woman's usually composed expression showed cracks of worry that made Victoria's anxiety spike higher. "Thank you for coming, Margaret," said quietly as Victoria slid into the opposite seat. "I wasn't sure you'd trust a meeting request, given recent circumstances." "What circumstances?" Victoria asked carefully. Margaret glanced around nervously before pulling out her own manila envelope. "These arrived at my home address yesterday. Someone wants me to know what's happening inside Damien's personal life, and they correctly assumed I'd care enough about Emma to act on the information." Victoria's pulse quickened as Margaret spread out photographs across the small table. Images of Natasha meeting with strangers in expensive restaurants, exchanging briefcases and documents. Phone records showing dozens of calls to Harrison Mitchell's private number. Bank statements revealing the payments Victoria had discovered. In her own mysterious envelope. How long have you known? Victoria whispered. Suspected for weeks, confirmed yesterday when these arrived, Margaret replied grimly. Damien's been making increasingly poor business decisions, but they're not really his decisions. Natasha has been influencing every major choice, steering him toward options that benefit Mitchell's company while damaging his own. Victoria felt puzzle pieces clicking together with terrifying clarity. She's not just stealing information, she's manipulating him into destroying his own business, while thinking she's helping him succeed. Exactly. Once they're married, she'll have legal access to everything. Even if Damien discovers the truth later, she'll own half his assets, and can claim she was just trying to help salvage what her family connections couldn't save. Margaret's expression grew even more troubled as she pulled out another document. But Emma is the real target here. Look at this. Victoria's hands trembled as she read the boarding school enrollment papers, already signed by Damien and dated. For next Monday, below Damien's signature, a note in Natasha's handwriting read, "Emergency placement necessary due to escalating behavioral issues and attachment disorders. Child requires immediate professional intervention." He signed these? Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. 3 days ago, during a meeting with school administrators that Natasha arranged, she presented the psychological evaluation you probably saw in your packet, along with reports from Emma's teacher claiming disruptive classroom behavior. Victoria's mind reeled. Emma hasn't been disruptive. Her teacher loves her. Principal Anderson just called her parents last week to praise her improvement in mathematics. The reports were falsified, just like the psychological evaluation. Damien doesn't know that. He's been convinced that Emma is struggling emotionally and needs specialized care that only boarding school can provide. The scope of Natasha's manipulation was breathtaking. She had created an entirely fictional narrative about Emma's mental health, complete with professional documentation and expert recommendations. Damien, trusting his fiancé's concern for his daughter, had signed papers that would exile Emma from everyone who truly loved her. "Margaret, we have to tell him," Victoria said desperately. "Show him these documents. Explain what's really happening." Expression turned pained. "I tried yesterday. Made an appointment. Brought copies of everything. But Natasha was already in his office when I arrived, and she managed the entire conversation. She positioned our evidence as jealous employees trying to sabotage their happiness. Damien didn't look at a single document." Victoria felt the walls closing in around them. Natasha had anticipated opposition and prepared defenses that painted anyone who challenged her as petty, jealous, or unstable, the perfect trap, leaving Emma completely vulnerable. "There has to be something we can do," Victoria insisted. "Some way to make him see the truth." "Actually, there might be," Margaret said slowly, pulling out her phone. Natasha made one crucial mistake. She's been using Damien's home office for her meetings with Mitchell's representatives, thinking the penthouse was completely secure. But Damien had a new security system installed last month, including audio recording in all common areas. Flared in Victoria's chest. The recordings would prove everything. If we can access them before Natasha realizes they exist, the system backs up to a secure server that only Damien and his head of security can access normally. But I have administrative privileges for scheduling and maintenance purposes. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities and dangers. Getting the recordings would require breaking into Damien's personal files. That's a serious crime if we're caught. Less serious than allowing a child to be psychologically destroyed and a good man to lose everything he's worked for, Margaret replied firmly. I've watched Emma grow up in that office, seen how much she means to Damien. I can't stand by and watch Natasha tear them apart. The two women stared at each other across the small table, both understanding the magnitude of what they were contemplating. Corporate espionage, breaking and entering, violation of privacy laws. If they were wrong about any detail, if Natasha discovered their plan, if Damien chose to believe his fiancée over the evidence, they would both face criminal charges and professional ruin. But Emma's face appeared in Victoria's mind, tear-streaked. And frightened, asking if she was good enough for her daddy to love, the memory crystallized her resolve. "What do you need from me?" Victoria asked quietly. Margaret smiled for the first time during their meeting. "Access to the penthouse tomorrow evening. Natasha and Damien will be at the charity gala downtown. Won't return before midnight. The security system reset happens at 10 p.m. every Friday, giving us a 2-hour window to download the recordings without triggering alerts." "I still have my keys," Victoria admitted. "Damien asked for them back, but I haven't had a chance to return them yet." "Perfect. Meet me at the service entrance at 9:30. We'll have everything we need to prove Natasha's real agenda." They prepared to leave. Margaret caught Victoria's arm. "There's something else you should know. The anonymous person who sent us these documents left contact information. A phone number with instructions to call if we decided to move forward with exposing Natasha." Victoria studied the number written on a small card. "Any idea who it might be?" "Someone with access to very confidential financial information and a strong motivation to see Natasha's plan fail. Could be a whistleblower from Mitchell's company, could be law enforcement, could be someone else entirely. But they're offering to help coordinate evidence and witness testimony if we can prove the recordings exist." The prospect of having professional support made their dangerous mission feel slightly less impossible. Someone with resources and legal knowledge was working behind the scenes to ensure Natasha's crimes didn't go unpunished. "One more thing," Margaret added as they reached the coffee shop door. "Emma's school called this morning. She didn't attend classes today, and when they contacted the penthouse, Natasha said Emma was home with a stomach bug. But the school nurse was concerned because Emma seemed perfectly healthy when she spoke to her yesterday." Victoria's blood chilled. "You think Natasha is keeping her home deliberately?" "I think she's beginning the isolation process early. If Emma doesn't attend school for the next few days, it will be easier to claim she was too disturbed to function in a normal educational environment. More justification for emergency boarding school placement." The timeline was accelerating even faster than they had realized. Emma was already being cut off from outside observers who might question her sudden behavioral changes or notice signs of emotional abuse. "We can't wait for tomorrow night," Victoria said urgently. "Emma needs help now." Margaret nodded grimly. "I'll try calling Damien directly, see if I can convince him to check on Emma himself. You should probably stay away from the penthouse until our planned visit. If Natasha sees you there, she might accelerate her timeline even more." As Victoria walked back to her apartment, the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Tomorrow night, they would either save Emma and expose a criminal conspiracy, or they would destroy their own lives in a failed attempt at heroism. But as she climbed the stairs to her small apartment, Victoria knew she had no real choice. Some children were worth any risk. Some truths demanded to be revealed regardless of personal cost. And some women, when they witnessed evil disguised as love, found reserves of courage they never knew they possessed. The battle for Emma's future was intensifying, and Victoria Sterling was no longer fighting alone. The penthouse felt different at night. Shadows stretching across familiar rooms like dark fingers reaching for secrets. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she disabled the security system. With codes Margaret had provided, her heart hammering against her ribs with each soft beep. "We have exactly 90 minutes before the system resets," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast silence of Damien's home. The recording server is in his private study. They move through the darkened hallway like ghosts, their soft-soled shoes silent on the marble floors. Victoria couldn't help glancing toward Emma's bedroom door, wondering if the little girl was sleeping peacefully or lying awake. Anxious about changes she couldn't understand, Damien's study looked exactly as Victoria remembered, mahogany and leather and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. Margaret went directly to the hidden panel behind his desk, revealing a sophisticated computer server that hummed quietly in the darkness. "Here," Margaret said, connecting a portable drive to one of the server ports. "I'm downloading everything. From the past month, it'll take about 20 minutes to transfer." Victoria positioned herself by the windows, watching for any signs of early return from the charity gala. The street below sparkled with traffic and city lights, beautiful and distant, while they committed crimes in the name of protecting an innocent child. "Victoria, you need to see this." Margaret's voice carried a strange mixture of triumph and horror. "I accessed the live recordings first just to test the connection. Listen to what happened this afternoon." The audio quality was crystal clear, voices emerging from the study's speakers with devastating clarity. Emma's small voice, frightened and confused, mixed with Natasha's cold authority. "But I don't want to go to the doctor again," Emma pleaded. "The last one made me feel scared with all his questions." "Sweetheart, we've discussed this." Natasha's voice carried false patience. "These evaluations are necessary to help you become a healthier, happier child. The doctor needs to understand why you've been having such difficult emotions lately." "I'm not having difficult emotions. I miss Miss Victoria, but that's different." Missing someone who is just an employee is exactly the kind of unhealthy attachment the doctors are concerned about. Normal children don't form such inappropriate bonds with hired help. Victoria's hands clenched into fists as she listened to Natasha systematically destroying Emma's understanding of healthy relationships. Every natural emotion was being reframed as pathological. Every normal childhood need presented as evidence of dysfunction. "The new doctor wants to ask you some special questions," Natasha continued smoothly. "About your thoughts and feelings, about Miss Victoria, about how you react when adults set boundaries. It's very important that you answer honestly, even if the questions make you uncomfortable." "What kind of questions?" "Questions about whether you sometimes feel angry when people don't give you what you want, whether you've ever thought about hurting yourself or others when you're upset, whether you have trouble sleeping or eating when you don't get your way." Victoria realized with growing horror that Natasha was coaching Emma to provide responses that would support predetermined diagnoses. The psychological evaluation wasn't an assessment. It was theater designed to create legal justification for removing Emma from her home. "But I don't think about hurting anyone," Emma said quietly. "And I eat fine when Mrs. Chen makes my favorite foods." "Sweetheart, sometimes our minds hide thoughts from us because they're too scary to remember. The doctor will help you understand feelings you might not realize you're having. And it's very important that you don't mention this conversation to your daddy. These medical discussions should stay private until we have complete information." Recording ended, leaving Margaret and Victoria staring at each other in the blue glow of the computer screen. The manipulation was so sophisticated, so psychologically abusive, that Victoria felt physically sick. She's going to have Emma evaluated by a corrupt psychiatrist who will find whatever diagnoses Natasha wants, Margaret said grimly. With that documentation, she can have Emma committed to residential treatment indefinitely. Not just boarding school, Victoria realized with growing horror. Psychiatric hospitalization. Emma could disappear into the mental health system for years and no one would question it because there would be official medical records justifying her placement. Margaret's fingers flew over the keyboard, downloading file after file of audio recordings. "Here's another one from yesterday morning. Listen to this." Damien's voice filled the study, tired and confused. "I still don't understand why Emma needs such intensive intervention. She seemed fine just a few weeks ago." "Darling, that's exactly the problem," Natasha replied with perfect concern. "Children who seem fine on the surface, while struggling internally, are at the highest risk for serious psychological breaks. The fact that you couldn't see her deteriorating mental state proves how skilled she's become at hiding her problems." Victoria never mentioned any concerns about Emma's mental health. Victoria was part of the problem, not the solution. She enabled Emma's dependency instead of encouraging healthy coping mechanisms. Professional caregivers sometimes miss signs of serious dysfunction because they're too emotionally invested to maintain objectivity. Victoria listened to Damien being systematically convinced that his parental instincts were wrong, that his daughter's apparent happiness was actually evidence of deep psychological disturbance. Natasha's manipulation was masterful, using his love for Emma against him while positioning herself as the objective voice of medical authority. The specialists all agree that immediate intervention is crucial, Natasha continued smoothly. Waiting could allow Emma's condition to deteriorate beyond treatment. We have a narrow window to help her before these attachment disorders become permanent personality damage. I just wish there was another way, Damien said quietly. She's so young to be away from home. I know it's heartbreaking, but sometimes loving parents have to make difficult choices. Emma will thank us someday when she's a healthy, independent adult instead of someone who can't function without constant emotional support. The recording ended with Damien's reluctant agreement to sign additional treatment authorization forms. Victoria realized that by now, every legal document necessary for Emma's removal had been completed, signed, and filed with appropriate authorities. Margaret, we need to call that anonymous number right now, Victoria said urgently. Emma's evaluation is scheduled for tomorrow morning, which means they could take her into custody by afternoon. Margaret was already reaching for her phone when the penthouse elevator chimed softly, indicating someone was coming up. Both women froze, staring at each other in terror as the mechanical whir of the elevator grew closer. They're not supposed to be back for hours, Margaret whispered. Quickly disconnecting her portable drive from the server, Victoria moved to the study windows, peering down at the street entrance. Damien's black sedan was pulling away from the building, but she could see two figures in the lobby through the glass doors. Natasha and someone else, a man Victoria didn't recognize. It's not Damien, Victoria said quickly. Natasha's here with someone else. Margaret's face went pale. She knows we're here. Somehow she found out about our plan. The elevator stopped at the penthouse floor, and they could hear the doors opening. Victoria's mind raced through their options. The study had only one exit, leading directly into the main hallway, where they would be immediately visible to anyone entering the apartment. The server closet, Margaret whispered, pointing to a narrow door beside Damien's desk. It's soundproofed for equipment noise. They squeezed into the cramped space just as voices entered the study. Margaret clutching the portable drive against her chest like a lifeline. The recordings are definitely compromised, an unfamiliar male voice said. Someone accessed the system. Tonight downloaded multiple files from the past month. How is that possible? Natasha's voice carried cold fury. Only Damien and security have access codes. Administrative override was used. Someone with intimate knowledge of the system and legitimate access credentials. Has to be someone inside. His organization. Victoria recognized the voice now. Detective James Riley, whom she had seen in newspaper photos related to corporate crime investigations, but he was speaking as Natasha's ally, not as a law enforcement officer pursuing justice. Can we determine what files were downloaded? Natasha asked. Everything from the past 4 weeks? All your meetings with Mitchell? All the coaching sessions? With the kid? All the manipulation conversations with Damien. If this gets into the wrong hands, the entire operation is blown. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Detective Riley wasn't investigating Natasha's crimes. He was part of the conspiracy. The anonymous documents and helpful contact information had been a trap, designed to flush out anyone who might threaten their plan. We accelerate everything, Natasha said decisively. Emma's evaluation happens tonight instead of tomorrow morning. Dr. Patterson is standing by at the private clinic, and the commitment papers are already signed. We can have her in residential placement before anyone realizes she's gone. What about the evidence? If those recordings surface, you'll face serious criminal charges. Only if anyone believes they're authentic. By the time we're finished, everyone involved in downloading those files will be discredited as unstable employees with personal vendettas. Margaret Torres will be fired for embezzlement. Victoria Sterling will be arrested for breaking and entering, and both will be painted as desperate women making false accusations. Victoria felt the trap closing around them with terrifying precision. Natasha had anticipated their every move, prepared countermeasures that would destroy their credibility while accelerating Emma's removal from any potential rescue. The child is the key, Natasha continued. Once she's in psychiatric custody, her testimony becomes inadmissible due to her documented mental health issues. And within 6 months, she'll be so heavily medicated and psychologically broken that she won't remember what her life was like before treatment. Margaret's sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but Victoria pressed a warning hand against her arm. They needed to hear everything. needed to understand the complete scope of the plan they were fighting against. Damien will be devastated. Initially, Natasha continued with chilling calculation, but I'll be there to comfort him through his grief. By our first anniversary, he'll believe that Emma's hospitalization saved her life and that I'm the only person who truly understood what she needed. And Cross Industries will be bankrupt within 18 months, destroyed by information leaks and poor strategic decisions that I've been orchestrating for months. Damien will need my family's financial support to avoid complete ruin, which gives us legal control over his remaining assets. Perfect outcome. The conversation continued for several more minutes, revealing details about falsified medical records, bribed officials, and coordination with psychiatric facilities that specialized in long-term patient retention. Victoria realized they were witnessing the final stages of a criminal conspiracy so comprehensive it could destroy multiple lives while appearing completely legitimate. When the voices finally moved away from the study, Victoria and Margaret remained hidden until they heard the elevator doors close. Then they emerged from their hiding place, both shaking with a mixture of terror and determination. "We have to call Damien right now," Victoria said urgently. "Tell him everything. Make him understand what's happening to Emma." Margaret was already dialing, her face grim with resolve. "And we call that anonymous number 2, but this time we assume it's being monitored. We need real law enforcement, federal agents who can't be bought by Natasha's connections." As they prepared to make the calls that would either save Emma or destroy themselves, Victoria thought about the little girl sleeping somewhere in the building above them, unaware that her entire future hung in the balance of the next few hours. The final battle for Emma Cross was about to begin, and this time there would be no second chances. Either they exposed the truth completely, or a precious child would disappear into a system designed to break her spirit and steal her life. Victoria. Sterling had spent 18 months learning to love Emma like her own daughter. Now she would discover what sacrifices that love truly demanded. The war between truth and deception was about to reach its climactic moment, and only one side could emerge victorious.